Picture this. It's the summer of 1974, and America is just broken. It's been shattered by war, by scandal, by a deep, deep crisis of faith in its own government. So who steps up to try and put the pieces back together? Not some charismatic hero, but an unelected, unassuming congressman from Michigan. This is the story of Gerald Ford and his incredibly controversial attempt to heal a nation on the brink.
Those were the very first words Gerald Ford spoke as president. Think about that. Not a triumphant victory speech, but a sigh of relief. A collective exhale for a country that had been holding its breath for years. But what exactly was this long national nightmare he was talking about? What had the country just been through?
Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a total cascade of trauma. You had the Vietnam War, which had literally ripped the country in two, ending with the last American troops pulling out in 1973. Back home, it felt like the whole fabric of society was coming apart at the seams, from the shock of the Kent State killings to the slow-motion train wreck that was the Watergate scandal, which of course ended with the U.S. president resigning in utter disgrace.
So that brings us to the big question, right? The one facing President Ford. How on earth do you even begin to heal a country from that kind of division? The wounds were everywhere, from our politics all the way down to people's personal faith. And really, his entire presidency was going to be about trying to answer that impossible question.
Okay, so to really get what Ford was up against, we have to dive into just how bad things were. We're talking about an atmosphere thick with paranoia and distrust. The very idea of trusting your leaders, well, it felt like a joke.
And this right here really gets to the core of the problem. Under President Nixon, religion had become, well, a public performance. He held these big weekly church services right in the White House, but the guest list was all about political allies and big money donors. He'd use religious language to basically say his policies were God's will, which meant if you disagreed, you weren't just un-American, you were basically un-Christian. Now Ford, he was the complete opposite. For him, faith was intensely private. He'd have these choir prayer meetings, and one of the first things he did as president was shut down those White House services. He believed faith was supposed to be a private compass, not a public weapon.
So, what was the result of all that distrust? Well, look at this number. When Gerald Ford took office, public support for the presidency and for the Republican Party had absolutely tanked. We're talking just 24%. It's like he was handed the keys to a sinking ship in the middle of a hurricane.
So who was this guy anyway? He wasn't some flashy, charismatic leader. He was something else. A quiet, steady hand that maybe was just what the country needed.
Yeah, Gerald Ford was never, ever supposed to be president. He was a career congressman, a man known for being, well, a decent, steady guy, a man of integrity. But then, in a crazy turn of events, both the president and the vice president resigned. And suddenly, there he was, in the Oval Office. He's still the only person to have ever become president without being elected to it. And if you want to understand what made him tick, look no further than this verse from Proverbs. This wasn't something he'd throw out in speeches for applause. No, this was a deeply personal mantra, something he'd apparently repeat to himself every single day. And that quiet, personal faith, it would end up being the guide for his most explosive decisions.
See, Ford seemed to believe that real healing couldn't be slow and careful. It had to be bold, it had to be decisive, and it was going to be deeply, deeply unpopular. He basically decided to rip off two of the country's biggest, most painful band-aids all at once.
So what were they? First up, the big one. Just 1 month in, he grants a full, free, and absolute pardon to Richard Nixon. He wanted to spare the country what would have been a long, ugly, divisive trial. And then second, he announces a program of clemency for Vietnam draft evaders and deserters, an attempt to start healing the wounds from that war. And for him, these weren't political calculations, they were acts of mercy.
And listen to how he justified the Nixon pardon. It wasn't about politics. He talked about it in these incredibly personal, religious terms. He basically said he felt like he had a duty, as a humble servant of God, to show mercy. He believed he'd be judged harshly in the afterlife if he failed to do so. He was, as one reporter put it, tying his eternal fate to his actions right here on Earth.
Wow. And the political fallout? It was instant. And it was brutal. His approval rating started out at a really healthy 70%. After the pardon, it dropped like a rock, down 20 points, practically overnight. It was clear, America wasn't in the mood for mercy. It wanted justice.
Now, the pardon got all the headlines, but this clemency program for draft evaders, it was just as controversial. And when you look at a document like this, I mean, you can almost feel the history,
These are handwritten edits on the proclamation. This shows a government wrestling in real time with this massive question. How do we bring thousands of our own people back home without looking like we're excusing what they did?
And the numbers here are just huge. We are talking about tens of thousands of people. You have draft evaders, military deserters, guys who fled to Canada, guys living in hiding right here in the U.S. Ford's plan gave them a way back, but it wasn't a free pass. They had to reaffirm their allegiance and do some public service. Okay, so at the exact same time Ford is trying all this public healing, something else is happening in the culture. It's like a seismic shift. All of a sudden, America became obsessed with secrets, with disclosure, with tearing down every wall between public and private. And it created this really weird, powerful mix of events. Think about this. The same year Nixon's plumbers are caught breaking into the Watergate, an X-rated movie called Deep Throat becomes a mainstream sensation. At the same time, the Watergate hearings are broadcasting the president's secret tapes to the whole world. 10 million people are glued to their TVs, watching a real family, the Louds, just completely fall apart on the very first reality TV show, An American Family. Everything was out in the open.
And you know who became the ultimate symbol of this new age of candor? The First Lady, Betty Ford. She was incredible. She talked openly about her breast cancer, about sex, about her kids' drug use, and later, her own struggles with addiction. And she said it herself, her openness was a direct reaction to all the cover-ups and secrecy of Watergate. And the public? They absolutely adored her for it. She became more popular than any First Lady in the history of polling, more popular than her husband even. So, after all this, where did it leave Gerald Ford? I mean, he brought a basic sense of honesty and decency back to the White House. He made these two unbelievably courageous and, unpopular decisions to try and heal the country. But the big question was, would any of that be enough for him to actually win the presidency for himself?
The answer was no. In 1976, Gerald Ford lost to Jimmy Carter in one of the closest elections in American history. Those acts of mercy, especially that Nixon pardon, they really did cost him. The man who tried to heal the country didn't get rewarded with his own term.
But here's the thing. His legacy wasn't defined by that loss. It was really cemented by the man who beat him. In his own inaugural address, the new president, Jimmy Carter, took a moment to stop and thank Gerald Ford for all he has done to heal our land. And in that one moment, it all became so clear. Ford's greatest accomplishment wasn't winning an election, it was helping to restore the nation.
And that really leaves us with a pretty powerful question, especially for our own times, right? Gerald Ford's presidency seems to suggest that maybe the most important acts of leadership are the ones that cost you the most, personally. It makes you wonder, does real healing come from winning, from political victory, or does it come from something quieter, the courage to do what you believe is right, no matter what it costs you?